The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of March 9, 2025. The podcast that lives, that dies, that tells your story. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's unitize the news of the bogus. Politics makes people as crazy as religion, and we're seeing what may be a holy war brewing against Elon Musk in revenge for his purchasing of Twitter, his support of Donald Trump, and his activity as a special government employee overseeing Doge and its pretty massive cuts on all sorts of federal programs. Elon, of course, has received all sorts of death threats from people on the left, which has actually led to a few arrests. But the latest wave seems to be a bit more indirect. Acts of vandalism against Tesla, of which Elon is CEO and co-founder. Back in February, a group in California swore to vandalize Teslas owned by individuals in order to scare them into selling them. The group calls itself Students Against Nazi Extremists, or SANE, so it's Killian's Law in action. Since then, numerous Teslas have been vandalized around the country, spray-painted with insults, epithets, and Nazi symbols, or even pictures of genitals, and even having windows busted out and panels dented. The owners of these cars have posted pictures of the vandalism online and shared the Sentry Mode video of the perpetrator, or say they have shared the video with the police. Seriously, don't mess with Teslas because they'll just record everything you do. Superchargers were spray painted and some even set on fire, which also hurts owners of other EVs since those chargers are standard in North America. Individual Teslas have also been set on fire. And the crazy part is how many in the news media are blaming this vandalism on Musk and not the perpetrators. Many Tesla owners online say it's going to have the opposite effect of the one intended, because of course it will. Josh Pappy Hazel posted on X, "If you think assaulting my wife and vandalizing our Cybertruck is going to persuade us to join your anti-Elon or anti-Tesla views, you're sadly mistaken." Also, super impressed with how well the Cybertruck performed. Even with the B-pillar glass shattered, FSD and camera worked flawlessly on the 2-hour drive home. The violent mob was trying their hardest to bust the windows and dent the body with whatever they had available. No other vehicle I feel safer in. With the windows up, of course. Jacob Hilton posted, "The more extreme leftists vandalize Tesla vehicles, the more badass they become to drive." Many on the left are also saying this means that Elon should step down as CEO of Tesla, because apparently they feel people should give in to terrorists. Showrooms have also been targeted. Adam Matthew Lansky was arrested and arraigned in federal court after being caught on video throwing a Molotov cocktail at a Tesla showroom. The news media has yet to report if it was a mostly peaceful Molotov cocktail. According to reports, the security video shows him throwing 3 Molotov-like explosives and then grabbed, get ready to cringe, an AR-15 style rifle and pointed at witnesses as they drove off. Later on, police were called to the same dealership after reports of shots fired. Several bullets were fired into the showroom, striking a car, and one even going into an office and hitting a computer monitor. Fortunately, this was at night and no one was there. Surveillance footage likewise showed the car used by the shooter was registered to Lansky. Overall damage was estimated at $500,000. 7 Teslas were damaged, with 1 completely destroyed. In the words of the late great Ron Popeil, but wait, there's more. There was also a firebombing at a Colorado showroom, allegedly by Justin Thomas Nelson, who goes by Lucy Grace Nelson and is tied to Trantifa, another group engaging in nationwide violence, including killing a Border Patrol agent in Vermont last month. According to the Loveland Police Department, quote, On Monday morning, Nelson returned to Loveland Tesla while in possession of additional incendiary devices, along with materials attributed to vandalism. Detectives apprehended Nelson prior to further damage occurring. His crime wave began on January 29th when he used a Molotov cocktail on a Cybertruck, then on February 2nd when he spray-painted the word Nazi, on the 7th with more vandalism and arson, and a security guard caught him spray-painting graffiti on the 11th, and on the 24th, police confronted him as he went to the showroom. In his vehicle was a container of gasoline, a box of bottles, and wick material, all of the kind recovered in previous incidents. Journalist Andy No reported on X. Another Tesla store was shot up in Oregon in now the third violent attack in the state. The Tesla location in Tigard, near Portland, had rounds fired into the vehicles and building on March 6. Just days earlier, a trans extremist was federally charged for allegedly firebombing and shooting up a Tesla store in Salem in 2 attacks. Leftists and Antifa have been calling for violent attacks on the business as revenge against Elon Musk and the president. Governor Tina Kotek has said nothing about the leftist political violence in her state. In 2020, she came out in support of the Antifa rioters. Folks, Musk only owns about 13% of Tesla. So you're not only hurting Tesla owners, you're hurting a lot of stockholders other than Elon as well. Meanwhile, Elon remains the world's richest person, so I don't know what damage you think you're doing to him. But the fact is, no one who thought their criticism was valid, who thought they were on the right side, would resort to this.
Sometimes you just have to stomp some skulls. From the mind of Mr. Dapperton, a game for the ages. In a world where a race of undead furries tries to take over the world's nuclear arsenal, one man must stop them. But which man? You choose. The Orange Overlord.
Ow, my ear!
Bernie Slanders. Debate Dominator.
My kip was ruined!
Or Joe Sleepy.
Build me back.
And of course, Mr. Fancy Pants himself.
Forget those losers! You can get the Gold Edition and play as 4 more characters, including me, the Spooky Spaceman, along with Billionaire Brat, Professor Proof, and the easiest way to play, as Jesus himself!
7 complete different worlds with more coming all the time. Full controller support. You can even get eaten by a worm and pooped out into a furry cathedral.
And don't forget that Gold Edition, where you can play the ultimate challenge, Devil's Doorstep.
This gory satirical adventure pulls no punches. You know you want this game. Go to links.bogosity.tv/skullstompers and play Skull Stompers now.
Alright, so here's an issue we were wondering about. Will the crypto industry fare much better under Trump? So far, the answer seems to be yes, as the SEC is now going to drop their infamous case against Coinbase. In June 2023, the SEC sued Coinbase for acting like an unregistered broker because, as we covered, they were treating cryptocurrencies as if they were securities, even though they didn't even come close to passing the Howey test. Trump had previously called crypto a scam, but changed his position during the campaign. On his 3rd day in office, he passed an executive order to deregulate the digital asset industry. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong posted on X, "After years of litigation, millions of your taxpayer dollars spent, and irreparable harm done to the country, we reached an agreement with SEC staff to dismiss their litigation against Coinbase." He detailed how the SEC was wrong on the law, how caving to them would have, quote, killed the crypto industry in America, and how it was just simply the right thing to do. Previous SEC head Gary Gensler had claimed that crypto companies violated the law by not registering as securities. Armstrong said, quote, "We tried to come in and register, but it turned out it was a fake offer, as every crypto company discovered. Regulators are supposed to enforce the law, but they can't make up new laws on the spot if they don't like the current ones or weaponize a lack of clarity in the law. As for the new administration, quote, I have to give credit here to the Trump administration for winning the election and for the departure of the activist head of the SEC, Gary Gensler, who orchestrated this unlawful action along with Elizabeth Warren and a handful of their lackeys in Congress. I feel confident we would have won this case in the courts either way, given our facts were so strong, but it certainly helped accelerate the process and drive accountability. I called out the sketchy behavior of the SEC back in 2021, and I believe this comment turned out to be prescient. But as we saw with other cases like Library, the process is the punishment, especially with smaller firms, as they can just keep the process going long enough to bankrupt them. The dismissal still had to be verified through a formal vote of the SEC commissioners. The only opposition was by the sole Democrat, Caroline Crenshaw. Fortunately, they did it in such a way that the SEC can't change its mind later. The makers of the Dash cryptocurrency posted on X, now, after the Coinbase suit got dropped, all current cases by the SEC insinuating Dash was a security are now gone. We've long reiterated that Dash is not a security. It was mined from scratch over the past 11 years. Anyone can buy or use Dash and participate in the DAO. There's no central issuing party, no VCs, no owning corporation, just a fully decentralized network of thousands of masternodes around the world. We have weathered the security FUD storm for many, many years. Now we're finally on the other side. Dash's best days are still ahead. And that should also be the case with many other cryptos, although I couldn't find any information saying the Ripple case has been dropped. That's currently being appealed to the Second Circuit. Armstrong says he looks forward to the SEC being reformed. I think it should be eliminated. I mean, do we need any more proof that it doesn't do a single thing that's beneficial for the consumer?
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
There are a lot of people out there who feel it's time for some answers regarding what was really going on with the Biden administration. For as long as they dismissed his cognitive decline that was obvious for everyone else to see, up until his disastrous debate with Trump when they couldn't deny it anymore, even though they tried, it made a lot of people wonder who was really running the show. Was VP Harris stepping in when she needed to and they didn't tell us? Was it really Barack Obama running things from behind the scenes? Or was it just the deep state acting however they wanted? Missouri AG Andrew Bailey posted on X, I am demanding the DOJ investigate whether President Biden's cognitive decline allowed unelected staff to push through radical policy without his knowing approval. If true, these executive orders, pardons, and all other actions are unconstitutional and legally void. In his request to the DOJ, he wrote, by now, Biden's mental decline is famous. Under the 25th Amendment, his inability to make decisions should have meant a succession of power. Instead, it appears staffers and officers in the Biden administration may have exploited Biden's incapacity so they could issue orders without an accountable president of sound mind approving them. That would explain why the Biden administration's orders were aggressively much farther to the left than any previous president. He mentions the time when Speaker Mike Johnson asked Biden about his moratorium on energy exports to Europe, and Biden didn't know what he was talking about, saying he'd merely authorized a study on exports. And then, of course, there's special counsel Robert K. Hur's excuse for not taking action against Biden's wrongdoing from when he was VP, saying he was, quote, an elderly man with a poor memory. Bailey wrote, if Biden could not even form a mens rea for allegedly criminal activity, a low bar, how can anyone have confidence he had the capacity to make decisions as the chief executive of the United States? And he also reported, those closest to Biden appear to have worked hard to hide Biden's decline so they could retain influence they would not otherwise have had. Though presidents always have gatekeepers, in Biden's case, the walls around him were higher and the controls greater, according to Democratic lawmakers, donors, and aides who worked for Biden and other administrations. Staff limited Biden's ability to speak with others and limited the sources of information he consumed. And prominent Democratic National Committee fundraiser Lindy Lee recently acknowledged that Biden was not in charge. Rather, the people who ran our country for the last 4 years were his staff, his wife, and his son, Hunter Biden. I mean, that would explain why so many said they always saw Biden looking sharp. They wouldn't let them see him the rest of the time. Bailey called for an investigation into which of Biden's orders might have been unknowingly issued when he was incompetent. Quote, who has been running the country for the last few years? I fear that Mr. Biden, while he held the office of president, did so in name only and was a mere puppet for far-left unelected staffers. The people deserve to know the truth. I call on you to investigate whether it was Biden or others who took executive actions. If it was not Biden, then the people should know that whatever actions he took were void. It's a bold claim, but as we covered, the Biden administration did a lot of damage to the American economy, its people, its businesses, and the world at large, arguably more so than other presidents. At the very least, we need to know if this is the consequence of having an out-of-control administrative state.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv.
And now it's time to diagnosticate this week's biggest Bogon emitter. This one kinda breaks my heart. I made my main browser Mozilla 0.6 back in 1998, switching to Firefox when it was first released in 2003 as Firebird, and it's been my main browser ever since. Well, until now. There used to be a section in their FAQ that read, does Firefox sell your personal data? Nope. Never have, never will. And we protect you from many of the advertisers who do. Firefox products are designed to protect your privacy. That's a promise. And now, they've reneged on that promise. Their page used to say, quote, the Firefox browser is the only major browser backed by a not-for-profit that doesn't sell your personal data to advertisers while helping you protect your personal information. Learn more about the Firefox browsers and other products. Now it just says, the Firefox browser, the only major browser backed by a not-for-profit, helps you protect your personal information. Learn more about the Firefox browsers and other products. Did you get it? They deleted the phrase, that doesn't sell your personal data to advertisers. So, what's an internet to conclude from that? Under the question, is Firefox free? It used to say, yep, the Firefox browser is free. Super free, actually. No hidden costs or anything. You don't pay anything to use it, and we don't sell your personal data. Now it says, yep, the Firefox browser is free. Super free, actually. No hidden costs or anything. You don't pay anything to use it. And if you're waiting for me to say the "and we don't sell your personal data" part, sorry, it's not coming. It's no longer there. Yeah, that's not good. So yeah, there was an outcry. So Firefox had to go back on it, or at least pretend to go back on it. VP Ajit Varma wrote, "We've seen a little confusion about the language regarding licenses, so we want to clear that up. We need a license to allow us to make some of the basic functionality of Firefox possible. Without it, we couldn't use information typed into Firefox, for example. It does not give us ownership of your data or a right to use it for anything other than what is described in the privacy notice." Oh, is that it? We're just confused. I mean, what do we know? We're just tech nerds. Quote, "We changed our language because some jurisdictions define sell more broadly than most people would usually understand that word. The reason we've stepped away from making blanket claims that we never sell your data is because in some places, the legal definition of sale of data is broad and evolving. As an example..." Oh, good! They're going to give us an example, so we'll know how the legal definition of sell doesn't match our definition of sell. Pay attention. The California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, defines sale as the selling, renting, releasing, disclosing, disseminating, making available, transferring, or otherwise communicating, orally or in writing, or by electronic or other means, a consumer's personal information by a business to another business or a third party in exchange for monetary or other valuable consideration. Oh, so selling just means transferring your information to someone else in exchange for something. Gee, and here we all thought it meant exactly that. Yes, that's what we mean by selling, and that's what we don't want you to do. Basically, Varma just said the only reason why we took out the part about not selling your data is because we actually sell your data. Sorry you were so confused. This all comes after a major shift in leadership where board chairs are now major operatives with the Democratic Party, staffers for Obama and Biden, and DNC executives. Sadly, despite the recent change in administration and the cultural shift that accompanied it, this doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. So my secondary browser for years has been Brave, but there are also Firefox forks like Floop, Mercury, or WaterFox. All of these fundamentally can provide more privacy than Brave because Brave is still built on the Chromium engine, whereas Firefox Gecko engine is just fundamentally more private and secure. There's also the completely new from the ground up Ladybird browser, which should be available sometime next year. And by the way, if you're going to talk about how they need to pay for making the browser somehow, I would remind you that the Mozilla Foundation only puts like 6% of its budget into actually making the browser. They've made themselves become primarily an AI and activist group. Sadly, it looks like the Mozilla Foundation has become just another grift for activists and maybe even money laundering. Most of their money just goes straight out the door to other foundations that have nothing to do with making web browsers. But hey, it's open source. No matter what, we can always go elsewhere. No matter what, they can't take that away from us. So all of that makes the Mozilla Foundation this week's biggest Bogon emitter.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/Tuttle Twins.
And now let's anti-disestablishmentarianize this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
And this week we have to give it to the Supreme Court because 5 of the 9 greatest legal expert minds in our country just failed basic civics. We have 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. They're all separate and co-equal, which is how we get separation of powers, a crucial aspect of checks and balances. And that means the judicial doesn't get to second-guess the president on purely executive actions. They can make sure he's executing the laws passed by the legislative branch, they can make sure he's not doing anything unconstitutional, but as far as executive functions are concerned, only the president can make those decisions, and the only people he has to answer to are the voters. You can read all about that in the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the ratification debates, and, most specifically, from the Supreme Court itself in Marbury v. Madison. Before handing over the presidency to Thomas Jefferson, John Adams tried to frustrate everything Jefferson was going to do by appointing 16 new circuit judges and 42 new justices of the peace. Despite the fact that all of them were confirmed by the Senate, Jefferson and his Secretary of State James Madison refused to deliver the appointments, meaning the new judges couldn't take the bench. William Marbury was one of them, and he sued, but the Supreme Court found that, although it wasn't legal to refuse to deliver the commissions, to force Madison to do so would require the court to step beyond the bounds of their Article III powers into the executive branch, and they just couldn't do that. They ruled, when the heads of the departments of the government are the political or confidential officers of the executive merely to execute the will of the president, or rather to act in cases in which the executive possesses a constitutional or legal discretion, nothing can be more perfectly clear than that their acts are only politically examinable. They ruled that they could not issue a writ of mandamus to the executive branch ordering them to take an action. Quote, the authority given to the Supreme Court by the act establishing the judicial system of the United States to issue writs of mandamus to public officers appears not to be warranted by the Constitution. That's how it's supposed to be anyway. A group called the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition was set to get some money from USAID when the Trump administration decided that payments to them and other organizations were wasteful and potentially fraudulent. So they froze the payments while they looked into things. So the coalition sued in district court, and the court issued a TRO ordering the Trump administration to pay them $2 billion. If that sounds weird, that's because it is. A temporary restraining order is just supposed to put a hold on things, maintaining the status quo until a proper hearing can deal with it. TROs are generally held ex parte, with the other side not even being heard, since the idea is that this has to happen so quickly there's just no time. But an order to pay money sounds more like a summary judgment. Because it is. The difference? Summary judgments can be appealed when TROs cannot. So the district judge just called it a TRO to avoid all of that. The Trump administration appealed anyway because they have sovereign immunity over these things, and judges can't mess with Article II powers anyway. Otherwise, an unelected district judge could overturn the elected president of the entire United States of America. You'd think that would be a logical absurdity on the face of it. But 5 justices just decided to ignore that, and, without any attempted argumentation, they voted to require that the money be paid. Those justices were the 3 liberal justices together with Barrett and Roberts, who have their noses so far up the butt of the administrative state they can't see daylight. Alito dissented, joined by Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, and it is scathing. Alito wasn't holding back. Quote, does a single district court judge who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. Yeah, you don't need to be a Supreme Court justice to be absolutely bewildered that this was anything but 9-0 against the TRO. You just need to have passed high school civics. He explained, quote, "After issuing the TRO, the district judge grew frustrated with the pace at which funds were being dispersed, and on February 25, he issued a second order requiring the government to pay out approximately $2 billion. The judge brushed aside the government's argument that sovereign immunity barred this enforcement order, and he took 2 steps that, unless corrected, would prevent any higher court from reviewing and possibly stopping the payments. First, he labeled the order as a non-appealable TRO, and second, he demanded that the money be paid within 36 hours. This left the government with little time to try and obtain some review of what it regarded as a lawless order. The government moved for a stay pending appeal in the district court, but the judge shrugged off the government's sovereign immunity argument and ignored the government's representation that most of the money in question, once dispersed, could probably not be recovered. So that's one of the considerations for a TRO. You issue it to stop damages that can't be recovered later, generally by paying money. But in this case, that consideration goes in the opposite direction. If they eventually rule for petitioners, the government can always be required to pony up the dough. But if this case is just about whether the government can withhold payment for work already performed, how is the TRO necessary to ensure patients get an AIDS vaccine that doesn't exist? And if they pay the $2 billion and the courts ultimately decide for the defendants, how can they claw back that $2 billion? Absolutely insane. Quote, "With only 4 hours to spare before the payment deadline, the D.C. Circuit dismissed the government's appeal because it took the district court's TRO label at face value and determined it lacked appellate jurisdiction. At the last moment, the Chief Justice issued an administrative stay. Unfortunately, a majority has now undone that stay. As a result, the government must pay the $2 billion post-haste, not because the law requires it, but simply because a district judge so ordered. As the nation's highest court, we have a duty to ensure that the power entrusted to federal judges by the Constitution is not abused. Today, the court fails to carry out that responsibility." This would be an unusually harsh smackdown against a lower court. Here, Alito is smacking down his fellow justices. And it just gets harsher. Quote, "It is clear that the district court's enforcement order should be construed as an appealable preliminary injunction, not a mere TRO. A TRO, as its name suggests, is temporary, and its proper role is to restrain challenged conduct for a short time while the court considers whether more lasting relief is warranted. The order here, which commanded the payment of a vast sum that in all likelihood can never be fully recovered, is in no sense temporary. Nor did the order merely restrain the government's challenged action in order to preserve the status quo. Rather, it acts as a mandatory injunction requiring affirmative action by the government. And given its likely irreversibility, the district court's enforcement order effectively gave respondents a portion of the ultimate relief they seek. We have jurisdiction to review and summarily vacate that court's erroneous judgment." Basically, this coalition doesn't do anything except send out payments. It's supposedly about AIDS vaccine advocacy, even though there's no such thing as an AIDS vaccine. They pay no AIDS patients or doctors or anything else. Those are just the hostage puppies. What they actually do is pay other foundations that represent other politicians and groups, which they basically use to enrich themselves. If that sounds like it might be money laundering, well, that's exactly what USDS wants to look into. But if they give them the money now, they can just quickly fire off checks and then later go, "Gosh, we don't have the money anymore. Sorry, guess you can't recover it." Quote, "Sovereign immunity bars a suit by private parties seeking to impose a liability which must be paid from public funds in the Treasury. But that is exactly what the district court ordered here." He references Bowen v. Massachusetts, which, quote, "simply recognized a basic reality of APA review. After a court sets aside an agency action, a natural consequence may be the release of funds to the plaintiff down the road. Indeed, We have since clarified that Bowen has no bearing on the unavailability of an injunction to enforce a contractual obligation to pay money past due, the sort of relief that appears to have been ordered here. The district court, however, failed to mention, much less reckon with, Bowen before plowing ahead with its $2 billion order. The proper remedy for an agency's recalcitrant failure to pay out is in the Court of Federal Claims. One might expect more care from a federal court. So they didn't even go to the correct venue. They went to the D.C. District Court, and we've covered how the Democrats have the fix in there. Finally, quote, the district court's order violates the principle that a federal court may not issue an equitable remedy that is more burdensome to the defendant than necessary to redress the plaintiff's injuries. The district court ordered the government to pay all invoices and letter of credit drawdown requests on all contracts. That order encompasses more than just respondents, and the district court offered no reason why universal relief to non-parties is appropriate here. Yeah, the judge even ordered payment to people who didn't even sue, who weren't even a party to the case. Crazy. Quote, and this is not the sort of case in which the only universal relief is feasible. The government has shown that it is likely to suffer irreparable harm if the district court's order is not stayed. The government has represented that it would probably be unable to recover much of the money after it is paid because it would be quickly spent by the recipients or dispersed to third parties. Respondents did not credibly dispute this representation, and the district court did not find that it is incorrect. That stands the whole concept of a TRO on its head. The whole idea is to stop someone from doing something irreversible. And when the harm can be redressed with money, it's not irreversible. There is no sense in which a TRO is warranted here. They're not preserving the status quo here. They're altering it. There is no question that the government would have the $2 billion to pay its obligations if the judge finds judgment is required. There is every question that the plaintiffs would have $2 billion to pay back the taxpayers if the court finds for the defendant. I want my money now is not a valid basis for equitable relief. Alito concludes, today, the court makes a most unfortunate misstep that rewards an act of judicial hubris and imposes a $2 billion penalty on American taxpayers. The relief ordered is, quite simply, too extreme a response. A federal court has many tools to address a party's supposed nonfeasance. Self-aggrandizement of its jurisdiction is not one of them. Dang, don't hold back next time, Sammy! There's one big reason why the restriction on appealing a TRO doesn't apply here. Because this isn't a TRO. It's an injunction. You can call an injunction a TRO, but that doesn't change the nature of it. If you are demanding that money be paid, as the district judge is in this case, then you are ordering equitable relief, which makes it an injunction. Not just a TRO, which means everybody keep doing what you're doing and no more. But these plaintiffs are civil servants, so I guess the district court says taxpayers like you and me should just bend over and let them service us good and hard. By the way, the 4 justices dissenting here makes it extremely likely that they will be 4 justices for certiorari when the appeal inevitably comes. But as Alito repeatedly pointed out, and as the district court even acknowledged, by the time all that happens, it may be too late. That $2 billion and more may be gone. And when it does come back, they better make sure this doesn't set a bad precedent. How would you feel if a judge made you do something, had an ex parte hearing so you couldn't even be heard, issued the preliminary injunction, and then called it a TRO so you couldn't appeal it? That is exactly what the Supreme Court just allowed. And unless it's corrected, it'll cost us a lot more than $2 billion. So all of that makes the Supreme Court this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this What a Doge Does When the Doge Does His Duty to a Duke edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe to the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Davy Crockett. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity. But as members of Congress, we have no right to appropriate a dollar of the public money. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.